We can see math as a kind of constitutional law for the ancient Egyptians. That's in theory, but in reality, it was not always that nice. So we have some indications from ancient Egypt that there was corruption. For instance, we have the tale of a man from the Oasis who is complaining about misuse of royal power against him. So not always everything was so gloomy.
Carved upon its walls are scenes revealing both sides of life, the forces of order and of chaos. It first portrays an idealised version of Egypt, a time of plenty.
Here we can see typical scenes within an Egyptian temple or funerary context, scenes of the rich bounty of Egypt, all the fruit, the vegetables, the crops, the meat, the fish, all the wealth of the natural environment of Egypt, which was all obviously brought to the land through the good offices of the king, the bringer of all bounty, the intermediary with the gods. But also this causeway contained something rather more disturbing, evidence that dark forces were at work.
Further on down the causeway emerged a counterpart image, the flip side of bounty. An image so unusual, it's now displayed in Saqqara's museum, and it really is one of ancient Egypt's most haunting and revealing works of art.
Here we see these dark forces at work. What we have are two rows of emaciated victims of famine. These poor people, they're weak with hunger, they're falling down, they're suffering. And this is basically ancient Egypt coming face to face with reality, because these are believed to be the Bedouins who inhabited the desert fringes of Egypt. So it's as if this kind of idea of suffering, the forces of chaos, are on the periphery of Egypt, but they're getting ever closer to the Nile Valley. Egypt is starting to waken up to the fact that chaos isn't all that far away. This is ancient Egypt beginning to suffer.
Such gritty realism had rarely been portrayed before. Chaos depicted as the suffering of real people.
This isn't happening in some esoteric realm of the gods, where chaos is sort of portrayed as some sort of disparate magical force, very detached from reality. This is reality.
Through such realistic images, the Egyptians were expressing their fears to the gods, appealing to them to keep these forces of chaos at bay. But instead, the starving famine victims would turn out to be a chilling omen.
Peribsen was replaced by Keiskamui, probably his son, who continued his predecessor's construction projects and is believed to have brought Egypt's two regions back under central control, or at least reinforced unification. His most famous works include the statues at Hierakonpolis and Abydos, as well as his role as the father of Pharaoh Djoser. The Egyptian Third Dynasty starts with King Djoser, best known for his step pyramid at Saqqara. Manetho's timeline is hazy on who Sennacht was when he governed in the Third Dynasty, and even his name. Sennacht's name is only known from the Abydos monarch list, the Turin Papyrus, and two reliefs discovered in the Mastaba tomb, number K2 at Beit Kalaf. Djoser erected so many monuments that historians have long assumed his tenure tenure extended at least 20 years. He started military campaigns to Sinai and kept Egyptian unity, resulting in the stability required for his construction projects and the growth of the arts. Djoser's step pyramid at Saqqara is Egypt's first recognized pyramid, which was designed by his architect and vizier, Imhotep. Imhotep was a vizier, sage, architect, astrologer, and chief minister under Djoser, the second pharaoh of Egypt's third dynasty, who was later deified and worshipped as the god of medicine in Egypt and Greece, where he was associated with the Greek deity of medicine, Asclepius. He is thought to have designed the step pyramid in Memphis's Saqqara necropolis. This pyramid, which has 6 steps, is the world's oldest surviving stone monument. An inscription carrying his name on a statue of Djoser uncovered near the Saqqara pyramid site attests to Imhotep's high status in Djoser's court. The inscription includes titles such as the leader of the sculptures and the chief of the seers. Historical documents depicting Egyptian society and medicine throughout the Old Kingdom demonstrate that the main magician of the pharaoh's court frequently functioned as the nation's chief physician. The step pyramid started as a basic mastaba monument with a flat top and sloping sides, similar to many previous dynasties' tombs.
Not least because the power of the pharaohs is exercised by countless officials throughout the empire. They are sworn to Ma'at, treat the unknown as well as the known, the near as well as the far alike. These are official rules of conduct for the state administration, something like modern compliancy rules. However, it's unlikely that they were always observed.
Of course, the system of order of the Ma'at applied to all people in ancient Egypt, especially to those who had a role model function, meaning the priests and the officials. But they, of course, were also just human and often cared a little more for their self-interest than for the interest of others. So on the one hand, we have an ideal conception, which everyone should strive for, yet on the other hand, we have the realities of life.
Part of the reality is, the Egyptians believe they owe everything to their gods. But justice, truth and order are not always paramount. Especially during the so-called intermediate periods, phases of upheaval and war. Chaos and disorder are what the Egyptians fear most, a fear that transcends their myths. Once, Osiris was the sole ruler of Egypt, but his brother Seth envies him. He wants the throne and all power for himself. Therefore, he murders Osiris and then dismembers him. Seth scatters his brother's limbs all over the land, thus the myth.
The intermediate periods is what Egyptologists refer to as those times when centralized government broke down. Now, it's been called the time of chaos, and sometimes there was chaos and conflict, but it wasn't total chaos. The basic socioeconomic order of Egypt at the local level was maintained. Local householders fed their people, protected them. Local nome leaders, once a leader arose that took over a whole nome, was acting like a pharaoh for those below them.
There's little known about these leaders. Their names do not appear in the king lists. There were probably just too many. During the chaotic first intermediate period, no less than 70 pharaohs are said to have ruled in as many days. Power struggles over the double crown, the dismemberment of the country and foreign rule lead to civil wars and chaotic conditions. Especially when the Nile brings too little water, thus causing famine, or when the pharaohs don't fulfill their duty to provide for the people. Even so, revolts are fairly rare occurrences in the course of 3,000 years. For in the mythology of the Egyptians, Seth, the god of chaos, has a potent opponent, Isis, not only sister, but also wife of Osiris. She reassembles her brother's limbs scattered all over Egypt by Seth and heals him. Having taken on the form of a falcon, Isis finally allows herself to be impregnated by her brother consort. Their common son is the falcon god Horus, the patron god of the pharaohs. The myth of Osiris, too, serves to legitimize the hereditary monarchy of the pharaohs. This is what Isis looks like in human form. She's shown here as the mother of God with the son of Horus. She may look familiar. Isis can be seen as a model for Mary, Mother of God. She's still popular among Christians in Egypt today. Up to 10% of the population profess the Coptic faith, one of the oldest Christian denominations.
One of the key deities for the ancient Egyptians was the goddess Isis. Isis means set or throne, and her mythology is very complex. And the idea was that, in fact, she was one of the creators. She was great of magic. She managed to put her dismembered husband together and make him live again. She gives birth to Horus, who becomes the ruler of Egypt. And in fact, all rulers of Egypt are regarded as a living Horus because they are the incarnation of this god.
Up until now, Egypt's prosperity had flowed from its one source of water, the River Nile, whose annual floods enriched the soil, allowing life and agriculture to flourish. This natural abundance was the very bedrock on which Egypt and its perpetual world order was able to thrive. But this lifeblood was about to run dry. Evidence shows that at the end of the 3rd millennium BC, the Nile flood levels fell dramatically. As the very thing that brought them life began to diminish, the Egyptians believed that their gods had begun to abandon them. And for the next century, the ancient texts talk of suffering, starvation, and even cannibalism. Traditionally, Egyptian society had been built on the belief in the divine power of its kings. Without this belief, the Pyramid Age would never have been possible. But now, in its time of need, Egypt's king seemed increasingly powerless in the face of such natural disaster. And this would come to a head with a ruler who was well past his prime. Claimed to have lived for 100 years, he was Egypt's longest-lived monarch, King Pepi II. And this space was once a ceremonial running track, the type of place where Pepi would have to display his physical prowess to prove himself to his people.
Now, when any pharaoh had celebrated 30 years' reign, they had to perform the Jubilee ceremonies, and this involved running the ceremonial Jubilee race, 4 times round this circuit as King of the North, 4 times round the circuit as King of the South. It was the ultimate public display of their fitness to rule and their strength. It really showed who was in charge of Egypt.
But that's where Pepi's advancing age would eventually let him down.
Of course, when Pharaoh was relatively young and fit, this would have been a great celebration. But in the case of poor Pepi, then in his 90s, it became all too clear that Pharaoh was no living god, and this really undermined the whole concept of what it was to be a pharaoh.
Clearly as mortal as his subjects, any natural disaster must have seemed the fault of this less than superhuman king. And this combination of a weakening pharaoh and failing harvests led to rapid decline.
Ancient Egypt now faced its first major political crisis. For the power and apparent divinity of the pharaoh that had been so very important in the Pyramid Age had now vanished.
The architect, Imhotep, on the other hand, had bigger plans for his king's eternal dwelling. The step pyramid is a succession of mastabas piled on top of each other. each step slightly smaller than the one beneath, to create a pyramid shape. Earlier mastabas were made of clay bricks, but the step pyramid was made of stone slabs with carved motifs of trees and reeds on them. When finished, the step pyramid stood 62 meters tall, making it the tallest building of its period. To deter robbers and secure the king's corpse and burial goods, the real chambers of the tomb were dug beneath the foundation as a maze of passageways with rooms off the hallways. However, this strategy did not work because the tomb was robbed of all of its valuables, including the king's corpse.